Okay, so thank you very much. I try not to speak too long. The topic, of course, fits wonderfully our corona situation. It is about a virus or a plague that happened to Rabbi Akiva, or let's say not to him personally, but to his students at the early 2nd century. So let's say 1,800 years ago. I will, however, not really start with a plague. I will, in fact, actually finish with it because I want to explain the background, which is very important. And that is, of course, connected to two major holidays in Judaism, to the Pesach, the Passover holiday, and to Shavuot, the holiday of weeks, which are interconnected with the Omer time, the Omer counting. I will explain that later in this shiur. Now, I will go into a text. Up here we have it. As you maybe all know, at the Passover holiday in the evening, we have the Seder of Pesach, and we also have the Haggadah. It's a little booklet in which actually families or communities read through the story of the Exodus of Egypt and all kinds of discussion in the context. Very important is the topic of freedom. And right at the beginning, actually, of the Seder evening, of the evening of the Pesach holiday, there is this following text. It says, "It happened once on Pesach that Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yehoshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Asariah, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Tafon were sitting together in Bnei Brak and were telling the story of the Exodus from Egypt that whole night, until their students came and said to them, the time of reciting the morning Shema, which is the Hebrew prayer, Hear, O Israel, has arrived," one of the major prayers. So this is actually a nice story at the beginning of the Seder Pesach, which we celebrate each year. We will actually go back and see already the big rabbis of the Talmud, they also celebrated Pesach. They also celebrated the Seder evening. By the way, the Seder evening is probably the Last Supper of Jesus. So it's also very important in Christian tradition, by the way. So they were sitting, these rabbis, 1,800 years ago, and they were discussing the Exodus from Egypt. They were discussing the story of the Seder the whole night through. And then when it was early in the morning, their students came in and said, oh, it's actually time for the morning prayer for this hero Israel. It has arrived. You should go up and pray now. Now, it's an interesting story because Rabbi Akiva and other rabbis, there are several stories in the Talmud, and one we will have a look also later on. But it is actually impossible, or nearly impossible, that those two rabbis who are marked here in bold, this is Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tafon, that they were actually, in fact, sitting together. Because they are from their age so far away, they are actually at least one, maybe two generations apart from each other. So it's very unlikely that they really were sitting together in Bnei Brak, which is a place in Israel, and they were discussing there. Now, the question is, of course, if this did not really happen, why does the Jewish tradition puts in this fictitious Seder that is as if these two rabbis, like these more rabbis, but especially these two rabbis, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tafon, were sitting together? The solution, actually, or the answer to this question is found in a discussion in the Talmud. Now, the Talmud, as we know, was discussed over centuries. So that's why we actually have several rabbis discussing with each other, even though they are not really in the same time discussing with each other, but the discussions are added later on. And one is found in Seder Brachot, in Masechet Brachot, the Tractate Brachot 12b. There it says, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said, behold, I'm like a man. Oh, sorry, I was going too far actually. I mentioned the Shema. I mentioned this Hear, O Israel prayer. Sorry, I was already in another discussion. Now the question is, why did this come up in this story of the Pesach Seder? The Shema Israel, this hero Israel, is actually the most central prayer in Judaism, and is actually what defines us as a monotheistic religion. It says, hero Israel, our God is one. That's basically the on what we believe. Now we don't have really such any announcement of faith, but this is basically the basic idea of Judaism. Now it's interesting that this Shema Israel, this hero Israel prayer, is said every day, and it is actually also connected with the Exodus of Egypt, because we have to remember the Exodus of Egypt every day, and we do it with adding a little text at this prayer. And there is a discussion if actually this Shema, this hero Israel prayer, if the Exodus from Egypt has to be added only in the mornings or also in the evenings. And that is this text. It says, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said, "Behold, I'm like a man of 70 years, and I have not merited to understand why the Exodus from Egypt should be said at night, until Ben Zuma explicated it." This is actually why we speak over Zoom, because it's Ben Zuma. Okay. Explicated, as it says in Deuteronomy, in order that you remember the day of your going out from the land of Egypt all the days of your life. The days of your life, this indicates that the remembrance be invoked during the days. All the days of your life indicates that remembrance be invoked also during the nights. So it is actually a quote from the 5 books of Moses, from the Torah, the 5th one, actually Deuteronomy, where it actually says, you should remember the day of your going out, all the days of your life. So we Jews every day have to remember that God freed us from Egypt. So you can see how important freedom is, the sense of freedom in Jewish tradition. But it says you should not remember the days of your life, but it says all the days of your life. So why was this one word added? It would not have been necessary. It means that it should be remembered at the day, and it should be remembered also during the night. This is actually what Ben Zuma explains. The sages, other Talmud scholars, however, said the days of your life, that indicates that remembrance be invoked in this world, and all the days of your life indicates that remembrance be invoked also in the days of the Messiah. So we can see the rabbis also bring another layer to this explanation, because it says remembering freedom is not only about what was or about our situation now, but remembering freedom and the Exodus of Egypt is also something about the future. It is about the Messianic time. Because in fact, actually, in this life in which we live, we do not have the full freedom. But we also actually do not have full slavery either. We are somewhere in between slavery, between freedom. It's a kind of conflict. And it's also about how we look at our situations, how we look at our life. Because at the end of the day, this outlook defines for us what is actually freedom and what is the life we are living at the moment. So it actually shows on the Jewish approach to celebrating Pesach, this holiday of freedom, also during horrible times. We celebrated when we were persecuted by the Romans. We celebrated later, maybe also during the Crusades, for example, during pogroms in the Middle Ages, or even during the time of the Holocaust, we celebrated. And even now, of course, we celebrated it during the time of the coronavirus, because we can see it is not only about the past, it's not only about the situation we are in, but it's also about how we deal with the situation and how we look at the future and how we trust in a future at the end, of course, also in Messianic times. And we can see that this is now the discussion between the rabbis. I mentioned beforehand in Tractate Psachim, the tractate which deals with Pesach, with Passover, with this holiday. And it's the question, there's a discussion in 116b, when and how we recite the Hallel. The Hallel is a prayer of thanksgiving to God. And there is actually, it's usually the Psalms 113 to 118. This is part of the liturgy, usually in the morning on holidays. And we also additionally say it actually on the Seder evening. We do it in a different way. We split it actually. But the question is, how many Psalms do we have to say? What is actually defining this Hallel? And there is Beit Shammai. There is one rabbinic school, and they say, who makes the barren woman dwell in her house as a joyful mother of children, hallelujah. So that is Psalm 113, verse 9. Until then, we say Hallel. And the Beit Hillel says, another rabbinic school, who turned the rock into a pool of water, the flint into a fountain of waters. This is Psalm 14, verse 8, until then. And one concludes the sections of Hallel with a blessing that refers to redemption. So there also, again, comes redemption in. Now, Rabbi Tarfon, you remember Rabbi Tarfon, he was sitting together with Rabbi Akiva, also only virtually. He probably never sat really together with him at Bnei. He says that although one should recite who redeemed us and redeemed our forefathers from Egypt, one who did so would not conclude with the formula of redemption. And there is actually Rabbi Akiva who has a different opinion. He says that one recites a different version of this blessing. So too the Lord our God and God of our forefathers will bring us to future holidays and festivals in peace, happy over the building of your city and joyous in your service. And there we will eat from the Paschal lamb and other offerings until blessed are you, Lord, who redeemed Israel. And that's very interesting, because we can see there is a huge discussion, obviously, and a difference in opinion between Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Tarfon, he's actually the opinion that the Seder evening and the topic of Passover, of Pesach, this holiday, is only in the past. What happened? God freed us from Egypt. That's what we have to remember. God made the miracles on our forefathers, but that is history. That is done. Now, Rabbi Akiva, he actually has a different outlook. Rabbi Akiva says, it is true that it is also about the past, but Passover is not only about the past, it's also about the future, and actually about the present and about the future. It is about the Messianic times. If we believe that God redeemed the people of Israel in Egypt, we can be sure that God will also redeem us in the future. We don't know exactly when this will happen, but we will know that it will happen. And so it is actually not only the past, but it is actually, the focus is actually on the future. And it's very interesting, by the way, if you know the Seder this evening of Pesach, it is interesting that in fact the Hallel, these different psalms, are split. The first part of the Hallel, which is said before the dinner, is actually all about the redemption of Egypt. It's about the past. And the psalms that come afterwards is actually all about the redemption of the future and the Messianic times. So Rabbi Akiva said it is much more important to look into the future. Now the question is, why is there this difference in outlook? And therefore we have to look at another Talmud story. There are again rabbis, they were together on another occasion. It's in Tractate Makot 24b. Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Jehoshua, and Rabbi Akiva were ascending to Jerusalem after the destruction of the temple. When they arrived at Mount Scopus and saw the side of the temple, they rent their garments in mourning. When they arrived at the Temple Mount, they saw a fox that emerged from the side of the Holy of Holies. They began weeping, and Rabbi Akiva was laughing. They said to him, "For what reason are you laughing?" Rabbi Akiva said to them, "For what reason are you weeping?" They said to him, "This is the place concerning which is written, and the non-priest who approaches shall die, and now foxes walk in it. And shall we not weep?" So until there, I will come to the answer of Rabbi Akiva in a moment. It's very important. These rabbis actually lived in a time that was devastating for the Jewish people. The beginning of the 2nd century, the end of the 1st century, beginning of the 2nd century, it was the time when the temple was destroyed in the year 70. The Romans occupied the land of Israel. The Jewish statehood was totally destroyed by the Romans. The temple was destroyed. The Jewish religion was actually forbidden. So it was really a horrible time, a horrible experience. And that's why all these rabbis, when they were coming to Jerusalem and they saw Jerusalem is destroyed, the temple is destroyed, and even the holiest of the holies, where only the high priest was allowed to enter this place one day a year, because it's such a holy place, and others who would come there, they would die. There are now foxes running. So it's a horrible situation. And of course, they were weeping. But Rabbi Akiva was laughing. Now, the question is, of course, why did he laugh? Why was he happy to see the foxes run over a destroyed temple? Now, the answer is Rabbi Akiva said, in prophecy of Zechariah, it is written, "There shall yet be elderly men and elderly women sitting in the streets of Jerusalem." Okay, so now that the prophecy of Uriah was fulfilled, it is evident that the prophecy of Zechariah remains valid. The sages said to him, "Akiva, you have comforted us. Akiva, you have comforted us." Now, this is very important because you can see Rabbi Akiva was living in a tremendously bad situation for the Jewish people. He was actually one of the 10 martyrs who was later tortured to death by the Romans, because he kept actually going with the Jewish tradition and teaching Judaism. He did not give up, but he was able, even in the darkest hours of Jewish history, to see the light at the end of the tunnel. He knew that if the prophecy is fulfilled, that the temple will be destroyed, then of course the prophecy will also be fulfilled that it will be rebuilt. So this is a deep question about his trust and his faith in God and his hope for the Jewish people. This is actually the hope that remains the defining moment for the Jewish people still now and still the next 2,000 years. Why should we go on as Jews in the diaspora, in the exile, without a temple, without an own state, sometimes in desperate situations? Because we knew and we know that we can trust and we can believe in God, and God will return us to Israel and will rebuild the temple in due time. Whenever that will be, that is God's answer, but we will know it will happen. And then it's interesting, not only about the future, about the messianic time, but it is the question of how we define the reality, what we make out of reality. Because how we decide to look at this world and to look at the future, this is how we actually shape the reality and shape the future. Now, Rabbi Akiva, who was sitting in the darkness in the difficult times, he sees the light. He sees the bright future. And he goes for that. And that's why it's actually why he could be so strong and why it was worth for him continuing with the Jewish tradition and giving further the Torah and our Jewish religion. There is actually a story that Rabbi Akiva had a student, Rabbi Meir. And Rabbi Meir had two teachers, Rabbi Akiva and another rabbi. He's only called Acher in the Talmud, the other. So we even don't mention the name. Now, Acher was the guy, he actually thought Judaism has lost, and he basically got out of the Jewish tradition. But now, 2,000 years later, we don't discuss him. He might have had a more comfortable life at his lifetime, and it was easier for him to deal with the Romans, with the pagans, but now he's forgotten. But you see, we still discuss Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva is this very important example. Now, why is this so important? To not give up and to look in the future and to shape reality even in the most dramatic times. Because we are actually all, and this is probably Rabbi Akiva's thinking, we are all created in the image of God. And meaning we are created in the image of God, and actually not only Jews, but actually all humankind, means that God wants us as active partners in his ongoing creation. We do not believe that creation is the past, as we do not believe that Egypt, the freedom from Egypt, is a past. But actually these topics of creation, so making a reality in this world, creating what happens in this world, as much as freedom, are actually things that we can define. God wants us that we work together with him to make this world a better world, to fight poverty, hunger, oppression, war, sickness, and so on. Of course, we cannot totally avoid a lot of challenges that happens, like this challenge of coronavirus at the moment. But what we can do is actually that we can work together as society and do everything possible to fight this virus, in the sense what actually God wants from us, to make this world a better world. Now, before I go much deeper into this, let me go to the real story about the plague in the time of Rabbi Akiva. And this is actually during the Omer counting. The counting of the Omer is something special that we choose to do between the holiday of Passover and the holiday of Shavuot. Pesach is the holiday of freedom from Egypt, the exodus of Egypt. And Shavuot is actually the holiday of the giving or receiving of the Torah, of the 5 books of Moses, of God's revelation basically to us. And it's the question, why are actually these two holidays connected with each other? I mean, first of all, there's a kind of practical reason. We can read it in Leviticus, in the 3rd book of Moses, in the Torah, in the Jewish Bible. It says there, God spoke to Moses saying, "Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you come to the land that I am giving you, and you reap the harvest, you shall bring the Omer of the first of your harvest to the priest. He shall wave the Omer before God to be an appeasement for you. On the day following the Sabbath, the first day of Pesach, the priest shall wave it." Now, this Omer is actually just a measurement. It's just like one amount of something, in this of the first harvest. The first harvest is the first grain that we get in at this time of the year in the land of Israel. So this is usually the winter grain which comes in now. So it is kind of a first thank you or thanksgiving to God. We have already something coming in, some value for us, and therefore we have a thank you, a thanksgiving to God in the temple, when the temple was still there. So it was actually a positive and a very happy thing, because the more grain came in, the wealthier we were, and of course, therefore, it was a very happy celebration. These days we count are actually 50 days between Pesach and Shavuot. And this is interesting because now the Christian participants who did not know, that's actually the reason why there is actually Easter and Pentecost, because of why there are 50 days in between. It is exactly going back to the source. We know actually the Passover holiday is the source for the Easter celebration later on. And as I said, the Last Supper of Jesus is probably the Seder of Pesach. And then, of course, also Pentecost has this connection. I mean, Pentecost, of course, even the word, it means penta, it means 50. So it's the 50th day after the Easter holiday. And what is actually celebrated? It is celebrated universalism. It is celebrated kind of the re-event of the Tower of Babel. After the Tower of Babel, when people were divided by different languages and cultures, it is actually on Pentecost with the Holy Spirit. So it says in the Gospels that they speak the different languages. So kind of people are brought together. They are not divided anymore, but it brings the world together. Now, this is, of course, the concept also of Jewish universalism. And that's the basic, that it brings the world together. Now, the opposite actually happened at the Omer time, during the time of Rabbi Akiva. And that's why it is actually until today not anymore a happy holiday or celebration, but it's actually a time of mourning. For example, we do not have weddings during this time. We do not go to cinemas or concerts, which anyway we cannot do at the moment, but usually we could, and we do not do, because why? There is a story of Rabbi Akiva and his students. In the tractate of Yevamot, it says, they said that Rabbi Akiva had 12,000 pairs of students from Givat to Antiprat, and they all died during one period of time because they did not treat each other with respect. The world was desolate until Rabbi Akiva came to the rabbis of the south and taught them. They were Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Elazar ben Shammua. It was they who reestablished Torah at the time. And that's a very strong text. So this Rabbi Akiva had 12,000 pairs. Well, basically it's 24,000 students. Well, why does it not say 24,000? Why does it say 12,000 pairs? Because we see they did not treat each other with respect. So that means they were all good students. They were all scholars. They knew the Jewish tradition, but they all said or thought that they are the only ones who are right, and it's only about them, and treat each other with, and that's actually when the Jewish tradition said there was a plague and they all died during this virus plague. Now, what kind of epidemic was it? Later in the Talmud, it actually said it was something that choked them. They could not breathe. So it must be the coronavirus nowadays, that it only six students were actually able to do, and that was these rabbis, which I read their names. Why? Because actually they were working together. They were respecting each other. They were open for cooperation. They were open for a diversity of different opinions and different outlooks. And they accepted that there are also different opinions and outlooks. And nevertheless, that we have to work together. Never mind that maybe the other has a different way of approach to some topic, or that he has a different ideas about some text or whatever. And this is actually, says that the Talmud, this is what re-established Torah, which re-established the Jewish tradition of that time. Now, connecting this with the coronavirus, it is actually that these are kind of the lessons we can learn for how we deal with the coronavirus. Rabbi Jonathan, the former chief rabbi of England, he actually said we have basically two possibilities to react to this virus, to this crisis. Either when it's all over, things are done and we just get over it and we forget it all, and that's it. The other possibility is that we do understand that we have to deal as one humankind, as one mankind together to all these difficult challenges that happen in this world. We will have challenges, that is true, but the question is, if we are able to unite in dealing with these challenges, with all the different outlooks, with all the different opinions, we can work together and come from an I to the we. Then we actually can deal with these problems and can sort out many problems and create a new society. In Western societies, especially when we have this time of peace, stability, and economic development, people are thinking more about themselves. They think, I am much more important. I have certain rights. I want to have these freedoms. I want to have this. And we don't think about the we. We don't think about the society as a whole or about the global problems. The virus actually showed us how vulnerable we are, and also even economically, and that in fact, if we want to go forward, we have to come from this I to the we. Rabbi Sachs actually suggests 5 we's. Just shortly said, and then I'm done with my shiur, don't worry, with this lecture. The first is the we of global human solidarity. That we understand we have, at the end of the day, this virus and other problems, they don't stop at borders. We have the same fears, we have the same dangers, we have the same risks. And it's not only about the virus, but it's also about other things like war, poverty, inequality, environmental issues. This is something not one person can sort out, not even a country can sort it out, but we have to deal it as a global human society. And if we make that, that should be one of our goals. The other is the we of national identity, so that sometimes the countries are in heavy conflict, and we can see it actually in Europe, we can see it in our European countries, single countries. We saw it actually in Britain with the Brexit. We see it in the US, that people are divided, countries, nations are divided. But if we want to get over the problems in our countries and try to sort out the fundamentals, we have actually to come to a we of national identity. There is a we of humility, he says. We can see now, we think we are in control of everything. We think everything can be done as we want in this world. And we can see this small virus that even we cannot see is actually totally destroying everything we know. So we have to be a bit more modest in our approach. We should come to the we of acts of kindness, that we should help each other and have a feeling of solidarity. And not only now in the time of the coronavirus, but hopefully also when we are getting over it. And the last point is the we of hope, that we really hope, that we hope for a better future, that we know from the Jewish experience, like the time in Egypt, it started in suffering and in slavery, but it ends in redemption and freedom. It started with the destruction of the temple and the destruction of the Jewish statehood in the times of Rabbi Akiva and others, while we can see Jews are back in the land of Israel. The temple is not yet rebuilt. We're not in the Messianic times, but we are at the beginning of these times. And this is what shapes the human story. Out of the bad comes the good. Out of the curse comes the blessing. And out of this pandemic will, if we want, come a new collective identity and a new collective responsibility. That is actually the message of Rabbi Akiva, and that is in fact the Jewish story. So thank you very much for listening to me for such a long time. And now I'm very happy to answer questions, or we can also, of course, come into the discussion. It's not only about necessarily about questions.